The history of prisons, from dungeons to rehabilitation. Imagine a world where committing a crime did not mean going to prison, because prisons did not yet exist. Instead of jail time, punishment came fast and brutal: whipping, exile, mutilation, or death. Justice was not about reform. It was about fear, revenge, and public warning. The idea that a person could lose their freedom for years inside a guarded building is actually a modern invention in human history. So, how did we go from ancient torture chambers to organized correctional systems to today's debate about rehabilitation and human rights? This is the story of how prisons were born and how punishment slowly transformed into corrections. Long before prison cells, ancient civilizations believed justice had to be immediate and visible. In Mesopotamia, one of the world's earliest civilizations, laws were carved into stone under the rule of King Hammurabi around 1754 BC. His code followed a harsh but clear principle: an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If someone stole, they could lose a hand. If someone caused injury, they could suffer the same harm. If someone committed a serious offense, death was often the result. There was no concept of long-term imprisonment. Why keep a criminal alive and feed them when punishment could be carried out right away? Holding cells did exist, but only as temporary places before trial or execution. Prison was never the sentence. It was only a waiting area. In ancient Greece, punishment often meant fines, exile, or forced labor. A citizen who broke the law might be banished from the city-state forever, a punishment considered worse than prison because it meant losing identity, protection, and community. The Romans also avoided long imprisonment. They had prisons, such as the infamous Mamertine prison, but these were dark underground chambers used to hold prisoners briefly before execution. The conditions were horrifying: cold stone walls, chains, no sunlight. Again, prison was not the punishment. Punishment came later. As centuries passed, Europe entered the Middle Ages, and imprisonment became more common, but not more humane. Castles and fortresses had underground dungeons, where prisoners were kept in darkness. These cells were filthy, cramped, and often below ground level. Prisoners were chained to walls, left in their own waste, and fed barely enough to survive. Some prisoners waited years without trial. Torture was widely used to force confessions. Justice depended on power, not fairness. People in prison during this time were often political enemies, prisoners of war, religious dissenters. Ordinary criminals were still more likely to be executed or publicly punished than jailed long-term. Prison was a place of suffering, not a place of change. Everything began to shift between the 1500s and 1700s. Cities were growing. Poverty and crime increased. Public executions, once considered entertainment, began to disturb people. Philosophers started questioning cruelty and justice systems. For the first time, society began asking a new question. What if punishment could correct behavior instead of just causing pain? In England, new institutions called bridewells and workhouses appeared. These places locked up vagrants, thieves, and the poor, forcing them to work. The goal was discipline through labor. This marked a major turning point. Confinement itself was now the punishment. By the 1700s, reformers pushed for even bigger changes. One of them was John Howard, who inspected prisons across England and exposed their terrible conditions. He argued that prisoners should have clean facilities, proper food, and moral guidance. For the first time, people began to believe prisons should be organized, regulated, and focused on improvement rather than pure suffering. This idea laid the foundation for modern corrections. In the 1800s, two major prison models emerged in the United States. The first was the Pennsylvania system. Prisoners were kept in total isolation. They stayed alone in cells, reading the Bible and reflecting on their crimes. The word penitentiary comes from this idea, a place for penitence. But isolation caused severe mental illness. Many prisoners went insane from loneliness. The second model was the Auburn system. Prisoners worked together silently during the day and stayed in separate cells at night. Discipline, routine, and labor were the focus. This system spread widely and influenced prison design around the world. As the world entered the industrial age, prisons grew larger. Governments believed structured labor could teach discipline and skills. Prisoners worked in factories, farms, and workshops. However, overcrowding became a serious issue. As populations rose, prisons filled beyond capacity. Harsh discipline often replaced reform. Still, the belief that criminals could change continued to grow. By the 20th century, psychology and sociology began influencing corrections. Experts argued crime could result from poverty, trauma, lack of education, or mental illness. Prisons slowly added education programs, job training, counseling, substance abuse treatment. The goal shifted from revenge to rehabilitation. The word corrections became popular because the system aimed to correct behavior, not just punish wrongdoing. Modern prisons vary around the world. Some focus on strict security. Others focus on reintegration. In many countries today, inmates have rights, medical care, legal access, protection from abuse. This would have been unimaginable in medieval times. But problems still remain. Overcrowding, violence, gangs, and repeat offenses challenge correctional systems everywhere. Which leads to an important question. Do prisons truly rehabilitate, or do they simply isolate problems from society? Some countries are trying new approaches. In Norway, prisons are designed to feel more like campuses than cages. Inmates cook their own meals, attend school, and receive counseling. Officers act more like mentors than guards. The belief is simple. Asterisk, if you treat people like animals, they behave like animals. If you treat people like humans, they may return to society as better ones. Norway now has one of the lowest reoffending rates in the world. From ancient torture, to medieval dungeons, to silent penitentiaries, to modern rehabilitation centers, prisons have come a long way. What began as a place of darkness and suffering is slowly becoming a place of second chances. But the debate continues. Should prisons punish? Should they reform? Or can they truly do both? The future of justice depends on how the world answers those questions. Because the story of prisons is not just about buildings with bars. It is about how society chooses to treat those who have fallen, and whether we believe people can change.